The Tallgrass Prairie is a forgotten, almost lost landscape. No one alive today can remember seeing the intact Tallgrass Prairie when it was perhaps the largest single ecosystem in North America. Today, very little of it remains, and even so, there are isolated remnants that still cling to the majestic nature of this once magnificent landscape. The Tallgrass Prairie Preserve in northern Oklahoma is the largest protected remnant of original tallgrass prairie in existence, and over the years it has become probably my favorite location to photograph. Photographing the preserve is a challenge as its nature varies wildly with the weather patterns, yet in recent years I embarked on a photographic adventure that would push my talents as a photographer to its limits. Prairie Song is a documentary-style video that explores the essence of the prairie and seeks to explain why it became so important to me, not only as a photographer, but as someone who needs the solitude and comfort of such a place. The intent of the video is to blend both still images and video footage, where together the viewer will gain a better understanding of the flavor and nature of this wonderful landscape. It uses current and archived photographs I've taken over the years to tell the story of Prairie Song. For the first time, I seriously attempted to creatively capture nature using video footage. It became a tremendous challenge as over several days I battled against nature's wrath, dodging tornado warnings, flood warnings, torrential rain, lightning, and high winds to capture as much footage as I could under those conditions. I searched for several months to find a series of musical scores that would not only be fresh and new, but powerful and as big as the prairie sky itself. I discovered a series of scores that seemed to connect to my senses and represent what I wanted the impact of the video to provide. I shied away from the cliché scores and looked for something with energy and power, yet at the same time retain the ability to connect to the emotions of those who might view the video. The making of Prairie Song has its roots going back over 20 years, when I first discovered this amazing landscape. Over time, through accumulated photos and newer video footage, I created a stockpile of material sufficiently large enough and diverse enough to allow for the blending of their individual stories. The prairie is a living, breathing, dynamic landscape, and creating this video challenged me far beyond what I expected. Yet, without a doubt, it was the most difficult and challenging photographic adventure I've ever attempted. Please enjoy Prairie Song. A soft voice seemed to rise above the aroma of the prairie, to drift across the sea of grass as it pitched and danced in time with the prairie wind. An ancient voice, casting its song for all to hear. Listen as I speak of times past. Come, hear my song, and share my story, for I am the Tallgrass Prairie. I stood atop a grassy knoll a few hundred yards from the gravel road that undulates through the preserve. It was my first visit to this amazing landscape back in May of 1996. In all directions, all I could see were fields of grass ranging across the southern edge of the Flint Hills region that extend from southeastern Kansas into northern Oklahoma. Only a scattering of isolated trees could be seen, and with not a single man-made object in sight at this location. A few hundred bison meandered across the flanks of an adjacent hill, and their bellows keeping time with the Prairie Song. For a moment it was as though time reversed, and I was transported to another place and another world, a time before even my ancestors first moved to Indian Territory back in 1895, a time when bison roamed wild by the millions, and the Tallgrass Prairie stretched unbroken from Canada to the Texas Gulf Coast. Below me, acres of pale purple coneflowers added their color and fragrance to the warm earth-scented aroma that presented its greetings to travelers crossing into its boundaries. To the north, a field of black-eyed Susans exploded in a menagerie of yellow and black that contrasted with the prevalent green shades. Powder-like summer clouds drifted overhead in a cobalt blue sky, casting shadows that created a broken atmosphere that helped cool the landscape. Prairie insects swarmed here and about, landing on long stems of tall grasses that danced in the breeze. Then off again they flitted to another. Birds like the dickcissel, a scissortail flycatcher, a meadowlark, a buzzard or two or three, and a red-tailed hawk added their movement and flight to the choreography of this prairie song. I rested on the edge of time atop the grassy knoll on that first prairie experience and allowed the prairie to soothe my soul. I simply listened to the prairie wind as it spoke of times past, finding its way through the fields of grass. I felt at home. I was at peace as the prairie song replaced my heart with its own. I was able to witness one of those legendary prairie sunsets develop, and afterwards I knew I must return again to capture photographically the emotions and feelings this single day of discovery afforded. Over the next 20+ years, I returned again and again to photograph this amazing place. Yet over time it became evident the only way to truly capture the prairie song was to photograph it using both still pictures and video footage. For the prairie is a living, breathing, moving work of nature, ever-changing, always beckoning. In spite of the thousands of photographs I made here, I wanted more, to create something deeper and richer with a stronger message, and so I returned another time, most recently, to spend several days on location, moving across and filming this amazing landscape. I was greeted with stormy skies and tornado warnings. That's the way it is on the prairie, especially in Oklahoma, the bullseye of Tornado Alley. Most people think of the prairie as one giant blended landscape when in reality it is a diverse area with a rich natural history. Although subdivided into numerous smaller prairie types, there are three basic prairie regions in North America. To the west, climbing toward the Rocky Mountains, you will find the shortgrass prairie, characterized by short, scrubby plants and a much drier climate. In the central portion of the country lies the mixed grass prairie, characterized by a blending of shortgrass and tallgrass plants and animals. The tallgrass prairie occupies the eastern portion of the prairie regions and originally stretched from southern Canada to the Texas Gulf Coast and extended eastward across Iowa and into Illinois. It was perhaps the largest single ecosystem in North America, at one time covering over 400,000 square miles, about 170 million acres. It was created over thousands of years as the climate naturally changed and was maintained by three basic elements. One, a climate of hot, dry summers and cold winters, along with enough moisture to promote the growth of hundreds of unique plants. And secondly, fire, often started by lightning and sometimes Native Americans, but they could burn for days and help to limit the intrusion of trees and other woody plants. And thirdly, the most important of all, the magnificent American bison, which roamed across the landscape by the millions, grazing, aerating, and fertilizing the prairie. The tallgrass region is truly a unique place, for there is no other location in the world like it. Yet within a single lifetime, from 1840 to 1890, 95% of the tallgrass prairie was lost. The bison were killed off, fire was suppressed to protect property and lives, and agricultural development transformed the landscape. It was the most dramatic reshaping of a landscape by humans in history. In some places, over 99% of the original tallgrass prairie was lost. Today, the only place where horizon-to-horizon vistas of original tallgrass prairie can be found is in the Flint Hills regions of Kansas and Oklahoma. Exploring the tallgrass prairie requires more than simply driving through and stopping at a scenic overlook. It requires a willingness to step into it, experience it up close, to feel it underfoot and to listen to its song and to live its story. When allowed to speak to you in such a way, well, you begin to see what the prairie has to offer, not only photographically, but emotionally. For now it becomes less of a visual capture and more of a spiritual type of understanding that leads to the imaging of its flavor, strength, serenity, and power. Capturing what the prairie has to offer requires more than ordinary photographs. It requires a commitment to explore and to seek out the depth of its story. The more I photographed it, the more I began to realize how static images alone do not always capture the full complexity of the prairie. The prairie is a living, moving, breathing entity, and the wind searches through the grasses and the earth earthen aroma fills your senses, and the sounds of the prairie infiltrates your inner feelings. And the light that is the heart and soul of the prairie becomes a photographer's most important resource. It vibrates with life. To create powerful moving images became the most difficult technical challenge, but one I was willing to take on. Wildlife on the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve is as diverse as nature itself. Almost 3,000 bison roam across its boundaries and live their lives pretty much the same way their ancestors did. There are various habitats found within the preserve, from creeks and ponds, along with rocky canyons, to mesa-like hills, to cross timbers, and of course the amazing prairie itself. Within these habitats can be found hundreds of plants and animal species, and many migratory birds frequent the area as well. Birds provided a rare treat during my last visit, as I was able to watch and photograph several uncommon types, like the American avocet, which by all accounts is the preserve would be on their easternmost edge of their range. Oklahoma's state bird, the scissor-tailed flycatcher, is always a delight to see and photograph. I also found a flight of long-billed dowitchers and the ever-present killdeer, whose wounded wing antics was not only comical but fascinating to watch. Early every morning you can often hear bobwhite quail calling with their distinctive whistle, and the bobwhite unfortunately has been decimated with what is known as eyeworm disease, which blinds them in recent years, and researchers are attempting new and creative ways to combat the infestation. I also discovered several other bird types, and to be honest with you, I'm not sure what they were, but they certainly were fascinating to watch and photograph. There are two things bigger than life on the prairie: the landscape and the big skies. One is not present without the other, as they serve to complement each other. While the landscape provides that sense of place, the sky provides that sense of bigness, and where the two intersect there is a blending of ancient with the present. The skies are so varied here that each day becomes a new revelation, and no two are ever exactly the same. Much of that uniqueness depends on your location, whether watching the sun rise over a rocky arroyo or sitting on a grassy knoll watching the sun end the day behind a distant hill. A brand new encounter can be guaranteed each time. It is difficult to find words to describe the legendary prairie sky. For some reason, I just cannot adequately do so. Sometimes it's best to allow those moments to speak for themselves. There was one photo of the sky that became a favorite of mine. It was taken on a very cloudy, overcast morning when the sun was just started to kind of burn a small hole in this real thick cloud cover. And waving in front of me in the wind was this wild white indigo plant, and it was swaying back and forth. And I had to wait for the wind to die down, and I was losing that light very quickly. And eventually it did die down, and the indigo plant popped back upright. And I snapped a couple of real quick photos, and then the clouds closed in again over that sun, and it was gone. But over time, this photo became one of my favorites because, well, the circumstances around it were several hours of work to get two photographs where one of them actually turned out. An epic landscape carries with it an epic experience. Not often in our lives are we allowed to discover such moments, and when they present themselves, it is through our heart we desire to find fulfillment and significance of why we are there. Somewhere deep inside we understand why this is so, and within a place like the prairie can be found the purpose of spirit required to fill the voids that try to overwhelm us. I return here because I long to dwell more closely with one of God's most enduring creations. The Prairie Song serenades us with its story. The Prairie Song comforts our burdens. It pulls us close, and somehow we instinctively know why it is important to find refuge here. While standing alone on this epic landscape and watching the noble hawks sail on gossamer wings, I am reminded of why I am there. For even as the hawk sails freely above, it is my heart that soars. When the Tallgrass Prairie first appeared to me, I had no idea at the time the impact it would have on my life. But the more time I spent walking across it, the more obvious it became why this place is so special. It is so rare. It has now becomes a privilege to stand in a single location and see nothing but a rolling terrain of wild grasses. Exploring the Tallgrass Prairie is an adventure filled with an abundance of not only photographic opportunity, but one filled with a compelling song, a prairie song that echoes across time, reminding us of the importance and legacy of this lost and almost forgotten landscape. I hope you have enjoyed exploring this amazing place. It is truly a never-ending adventure.